All right, I'm having a chat, a wonderful talk. We're going to be speaking about a phenomenal recording of the music of Miguel Kertsman, uh, Brazilian Recife. Am I pronouncing it correctly this time around?
Recife in English, that sounds
Recife.
good.
Okay, I got the accent
Uh-huh.
wrong again. Brazilian American composer, keyboardist, producer, engineer. Those of you that will, I'm sure, rush out. I'm serious. We're not trying to sell 1,000 CDs here, Miguel. We know this, but those who are programmers, who are conductors, this CD has three very, very unique and very interesting concertos, and then a superb chamber symphony that is complex and difficult and all that good stuff. All of your music is, but this is really rewarding repertoire that I think conductors and other programmers should really run out and have a look at. We're speaking about the three concertos includes Miguel's Concerto Brasileiro for flute, strings, and percussion, 2005. Fabulous, underline fabulous. His concerto for violin, horn, shofar, and orchestra, and we're going to talk about that instrument. You are so correct in your notes about the magic of that instrument, about the transcendence of the sound of that instrument. This is let's see, from 2013. His journey for bassoon and orchestra, very, very complex, very difficult, very interesting, always conciliatory, can I say maybe, from 2012. And then this superb Chamber Symphony Number 2, New York of 50 doors. You'll tell us about that.
Sure.
Now get this, everybody, that I'm going to jump in and let Miguel have his say. I speak too much, but get this about this CD. Who are we? Let's see. Yeah, it's your 2018 Three Concertos CD on Naxos, on the Naxos
Yes.
label. That's what I was looking for. Get this about who's performing Miguel Kurtzman's music. The London Philharmonic Orchestra. Oh, conducted by none other than Dennis Russell Davies, the foremost interpreter and musician about contemporary music. I mean, I have no doubt that what I heard is exactly what I needed to hear. You know what I mean in terms of interpretation of these works. And now let's jump in. I'm aside from Marina Piccinini, I didn't even get that right,
Mhm.
violinist. I got close. Let's talk
That's right.
about the soloists for these concertos. The flute concerto, and I've described flutist Marina Piccinini. And how'd you meet her? What's that about? Wonderful musician.
Sure. Marina, I actually met in Vienna when, I've played some ping pong. We have crossed the pond a few times. New York, London, Hamburg, Vienna, then back to New York, Chicago, then back to Vienna. Such is the life of musicians. I dare to say it's sometimes more international than diplomacy itself. Uh,
Well
and
spun.
yes, yeah. So back in the early 2000s, I had a chance to meet Marina here in Vienna. Met her and her husband, the pianist Andreas Häfliger, and the Austrian Flute Society uh, approached me and said, would you want to write a concerto for? We're going to have a concert in the Konzerthaus, which is one of Vienna's main theaters, featuring only new flute concerti. And I had written a previous flute concerto, which was very different. It was more like a sinfonia concertante. Very young work. I was 21 and 22 actually when I wrote that one, and it was much more romantic and less experimental. And that piece was recorded by the late Wolfgang Schultz, who was the Vienna Philharmonic's first flutist. So Marina heard the piece, the Austrian Flute Society heard the piece, and then they said, "Would you want to write a piece for Marina?" And I said, "Well, that's fantastic. She's an amazing musician, and she's also very international. She's Brazilian, she's American, she's Italian. It's really fantastic." And
But but
so,
but but for sure, when you knew she was Brazilian, that was it.
oh yeah, I mean, because that really, then we just,
Your minds, your minds could
yeah,
meld.
we both, I mean, we're both obviously classically trained and educated in Europe and in New York, but the Brazil element is there. So there was that immediate connection. And so that's how it came about. So she actually premiered the work in 2005 at the Concerthaus. with the Vienna classical players, and I was really thrilled that we could coordinate our schedules so she could actually make this recording. So yeah, it worked out quite nicely.
Yeah. And you are Vienna based these days, yes?
These days, yes,
Yeah.
yes, mostly here. I mean, sometimes in New York, sometimes Chicago, but yeah, mostly here.
Now let's talk about bassoonist, and we're going to get to the French horn player. What a small world is the musical world. You know what I'm talking about. But
Yes.
bassoonist, let me try. Martin Kuskmann.
Yes,
I
that's
presume
perfect.
Austrian or German. I
Actually,
hope.
Martin is Estonian.
You would throw me. Anywho, tell me about and Gergely Sugar, French horn and shofar players
Yeah,
for this wonderful concerto, this next concerto. Tell me about these two guys and
sure,
bassoonist.
of course. So Martin, I actually met in New York through a common friend of ours, also a great composer, David Chesky, who was a pianist and ran a very nice record label, which now is it's online high definition audio shop. And I met Martin through David, I'm pretty certain, and we really hit it off because Martin, he's a real virtuoso. He's in a, he you know like when we actually talked about a concerto. I said to him, so, I'd like to do some portamenti, I'd like to do some polyphony, what can I write for you? And he said, you can write anything and I'll play. And I said, right, I'm going to write a five-voice chord. Yes, give me time to figure out the multiphonics and I'll play. I said, yeah, right. Okay, no, but really, like we put together a little duo, a little like actually a chamber jazz act, which we played actually in Chicago the first time, live on the radio on WFMT, along with a Japanese flutist who was in my jazz band. I used to have a jazz band in New York back in the late 80s, early 90s, and we had a great time. So Martin said, now that we're doing this, and we call the act MK2 because I'm Miguel Kertsman, is Martin Kuskman, so it's MK times two. So I said, let's do this bassoon and piano thing. There are some videos online. Then we did the same program at the Blaine Jazz Festival, which is near Vancouver. Uh,
Right there at the
eh,
border. Right there at the border.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and which was very nice. We
Beautiful little town.
gorgeous town, and the festival was beautiful. A lot of young musicians, a lot of talented musicians was fantastic. So we did that program, and then Martin said, "Please write me a concerto," and so that's how the idea came about. I came up with the original theme, which was actually the opening of that fugue, the first movement.
Hmm.
We played that as a duo. And the second movement was actually I there was one of the pieces we played as a duo. We had such a good time playing. It was called The Band, was part of the repertoire of the jazz band. And I said, something, I'm going to transform the band into a jazz movement for the concerto.
How
And
possible?
so that's how it came about. And because, like Martin is Estonian, so the first movement, I was really trying to paint a bit of a picture of the Nordic countries. It's a little bit dark,
Let me just
I,
jump in. Let's go there in a minute because I have a million questions for you about the substance of these works. Right now,
sure,
just let's make sure we get all the soloists
of course,
mentioned.
yeah,
How about violinist? Or, I'm going to
yes,
try Orsolia Korksolan.
that's perfect. Actually, great. I mean,
Nah,
sometimes
nah, nah. You're sending a check
I hear
later.
you say Orsholia or Orshi, but I call her Orsi. So I think we're both right. I hope we don't speak Hungarian. So Orsi Orsolia Korksalan and Gergely Sugar. I mean, Gergely is a conductor. He's a hornist with the Vienna Symphony Orchestra, along with Eric Kushner, who is also another hornist, also American with the Vienna Symphony. And I met Gergely and Orsi, his wife, in Vienna, as a matter of fact. And they're both incredible musicians, and they're also incredible people, and they're an incredible couple, and they live and breathe music. So and Gergely also happens to blow the shofar extremely well. He's a shofar virtuoso. I mean, he and honestly, I've never, when I wrote the concerto, what I'm trying to say is when we first worked together before the recording, just the three of us to go through the music, I was amazed that I was actually expecting much more. Um, Let me just say I was blown away by how he played. I mean, I couldn't believe it, how well
And
they both.
also, how about your writing? I presume that's the first time you've ever written for the instrument. Were you intimidated a little bit, or did you
For
know?
the horn?
Yeah, no, of the shofar. I mean, is there
Oh,
anything
the
different about
shofar, the
notated?
shofar. Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, I had a very clear idea about what I wanted to write in the piece, and I know the sound very well. I mean, of the instrument, and not really. I mean, the hardest part was actually to come up with a notation system that would work for for the standard, to be able to combine that with the orchestral accompaniment and let soloist play the pattern with the right feel. It's like it's the same thing when you write certain Brazilian rhythms. I mean, it's not a triplet, but it's not a dotted eighth note either. It's in between.
Like jazz.
Exactly, exactly, just like jazz. So you have to find like an optimum way to notate it,
And by the
and
way,
then
I've now listened to your CD about five, I think this is fifth or sixth time this morning,
oh,
of course,
thank you.
preparing for this interview. And well, just so I knew what I what I was talking about. But the point is, I've heard some very interesting, very subtle, very tricky, very little coy. I use that word a lot with you these days. Rhythmic figures. There's a little snare riff. I can't remember. I think it's in the second chamber symphony. Toward the
Yeah.
end, and there's just this little kind of almost completely out of pulse with whatever else is going on. In other words, brilliant,
Oh,
and
thank you.
and rhythmic variety, rhythmic interest, I think is so important in composition. The pieces move forward; they have pulse and interest and excitement
Thank you
with rhythm.
very much.
And so you're a master of that. And being Brazilian, of course. Let's, I forgot to introduce you to everybody. Let's just get there. Have we forgotten? Have we covered everybody? Have I forgotten
Yeah,
anyone?
so exactly, just yeah, just quickly, to finish about the bassoon concerto.
Sure.
So the first movement was about, like one part of the world, the northern countries. New York was essentially my home for a long time. That's where, I went when I graduated from college and had relatives there and made my life there. And we met in New York, Martin and I, and so he also worked at the Manhattan School of Music. So, New York was kind of like the inner movement. And the last movement, again, I'm going back to Brazil and to the town of Recife, and it's basically kind of like almost a fugue, but it's more of a double fugato in the frevo rhythm, which is a Brazilian carnival rhythm dance from that part of the country, only that part of the country. So
And you have
that's
described this in your notes, but I think for me, again, on whatever this has been, fifth or sixth listening,
okay.
especially of that movement, because you describe it as being a memory of your childhood, right? The
Yes,
carnivals and the street
exactly.
parades, and I know such things from Portugal: the street parades, the
That's
fish,
right.
the sardine festival, all that wonderful noise and ruckus and excitement, and hearing it, I didn't miss it ever, but hearing it now for the sixth time in that movement, oh boy, did I hear fun stuff. So again, when I use the word coy with you, it's an enormous compliment. You are
Thank you.
coy with emotions, with tonality, where you take a listener. Sometimes very deep, I think. In the bassoon concerto, I found that really went to some areas that, for me at least, seemed kind
Hmm.
of deep. But you always rise us up out and out. There is always that optimism, I think, in your music. So yeah, I want to get there. But let's get you introduced properly. Miguel Kertsman, Brazilian-born American composer. We've mentioned that. Worked on numerous genres. We've mentioned, concert stage, jazz, progressive rock, electronica. All of it's in the CD, by the way. Somewhere in one of those pieces, there's just about everything, including the kitchen sink. It's marvelous colors,
Thank
wonderful
you.
sound color. Film and game scoring. Graduated Berklee College of Music,
Yes.
1986. Conducting studies at Boston Conservatory. Not bad. Composition at Juilliard. Oh, it's getting better. Miguel Kurtzman.
With Stanley Wolf, I have to
Oh,
say.
okay, very well. Stanley Wolf, you've designed curriculum, postgraduate curriculum.
Yes.
Just reading some of this stuff, universities including, and on and on and on. The point is, it sounds to me as though not only has your life been diverse musically,
Hmm.
incredibly, and it all is in this wonderful CD. I mean, in these compositions, everything's there. This diverse and interesting personality, the jazz, the Brazilian sounds, the sophisticated Juilliard composer. You know what I'm saying? And at the
Yeah.
same time, you are totally conscious, I think, of the public's response. Because in my view, this CD is challenging. It's
Hmm.
it's also very accessible. It's all very friendly, very user friendly. I mean, I'm sure this is not an accident. This is your
Uh,
mind at work. Go.
yeah, that's those are great points. But first of all, thank you very much for the very nice intro. Yes, it's true. I mean, I when I think of the school days, it's all very it's more intellectual. It's more about learning the craft and learning from your professor and developing ideas. As an educator myself, and as you've said, I've held composition. In fact, I just came back from Dartmouth College, where I gave some lectures on music improvisation. Yeah, so I teach composition. I teach traditional composition. I also teach media, hybrid composition, and I have designed the curricula for two MA programs in music management and in music composition production.
So I've mentioned somewhere in my own notes that you have created quite a soup for
No,
yourself.
it's yeah. You see, but it may sound like a lot, and perhaps it is. I don't know. But to me, I have always seen music really. I know this sounds tacky even these days because it's been said so many times, but from the very beginning, since I was a child, I mean, I've always believed in music as one language, which has many dialects or many accents, but to me, it's never been. I've never believed in genres and categorizing anything. So sure, I mean, I had a great time in my days in New York as a student musician. I don't know how that happened, but I ended up doing a lot of dance records, house music records, and there were days that I'll be doing a house music, club record during the day, and then playing an organ and flute recital on Park Avenue at the church in the evening. I love playing Beethoven or Bach, but I also loved Oscar Peterson and checking out, all that music when I was really young. That is, oh my God, how does Frank Zappa do that, or how does Keith Emerson do that, or how does Ligeti do that? I mean, it's like it really. I just I never felt that I had to be in a box, and I found that to be very rewarding because when working, let's say, with DJs and pop producers they thought it was the coolest thing, that I'll go and get a string section to come and do like a very, kind of like contrapuntal arrangement, like they would say, hey man, do you know how to do Philadelphia strings? And I said, yeah, yeah, something like that, and but also to understand what it is to create like a very like a cool bass line for a pop song. So in jazz, I mean, like being in New York all those days and being in the scene, meeting so many amazing jazz musicians, having had the chance to actually play with some of them, um, just like a constant learning experience, and I feel that I'm learning every day. So that's what I guess you hear in the music. So it's not really intentional. It just happens that way.
Otherwise, it
Uh,
would be garbage.
exactly,
Nothing would be intentional.
it's not like and your reaction is I've heard that quite a lot. The interesting thing is when you have someone who sees music in a more let's say fragmented way in a more micromanaged fashion. There's nothing wrong with genres, but of course, I mean, genres became even more important now as a selling tool. It's a marketing tool. I mean, of course, you have pop music, you have jazz, you have classical music. You have some bass lines, but in the end, music is music. And sometimes someone, I'm not saying it's myself, you may write a piece, and for some folks, it may be, oh gosh, this is not music. This is laboratory music. These are soundscapes, or these are textures. There is no melody. What's going on? And then the other side of the coin, people will say, oh, A melody, tonality? Are you crazy? I mean, I actually heard that, when when I was studying with Stanley Wolf, not from him, but from some of the other composers, like who would expect you to write in a certain way, and that honestly turned me off completely to that path, because I really felt that you have to write what you hear, and
And
that's
what
what I
and also what you have experienced in your life.
exactly
Yeah.
exactly. So New York of 50 Doors is exactly that. It's a I remember living in New York when I was in my early 20s, in the beginning, as you can imagine, not an easy place to to
Few survive. Hello,
yeah.
you jumped in feet first apparently and opened every single one of those 50 doors.
Well, I don't know if I open all of them, but it's in time I realized that yeah, there was a lot of dues paying, and you pay a lot of dues, but you go through the mill in New York. But I'm telling you, what a great place. I mean, even the difficult times, and even like paying your dues and getting that first gig, making that first record, doing tons of sessions, running for your money, and not getting your name on the record because like they forgot to put your name on the record. It's gonna be in the next pressing. All the stuff that happened in the beginning.
I need to quote you right now. Hello?
Sorry.
Here's a direct quote, one of
Yeah.
yours, from
Oh,
your very mouth. Quote, music, as time and space themselves, is universal and can help bring people together.
it's
So you
actually
talk about cornball. Nah, not at all. Just as this CD is, I'm not trying to refocus because we're supposed to be talking about the CD, but
sure, sure, of
This
course.
CD brings people together. I think I tried to describe that earlier. There is there is a positivity to you that is
Thank you.
fabulous, and you've been there, you've seen things, and besides, the dark side is a good thing.
Oh yeah, it's
It's a
important.
wonderful thing. Yeah.
It's part of life. It's part of who we are. I mean, that's exactly what 50 Doors is about. I mean, it's and that's why, and that's of course on purpose. It's almost like a big rondo, and you have the main theme, and then the main theme lands on a note, which is a chord. It's a tone of a different chord, and it's always the same note, which happens to be an E. And then the first time it goes to E minor. The second time, again, I'm daring to be tonal, not always, but in that particular instance, and every one of those worlds, you go into a different aspect of the city, and that's exactly bringing all together. So you have people from all over the world, and this universality of music, because I'm fortunate to experience, and being in New York, in those days especially, how wonderful it was to literally meet people from all over the world and make music with them. And the spoken language just didn't matter anymore, because once you started to play, it didn't matter who spoke English well or not well, or if you're from Japan, the Philippines, or in the Middle East or South America or North America, it didn't matter. I mean, you just make music together. So yeah, New York 50 Doors is exactly that.
Very good. And while I'm just thinking about it, of course, your life has changed. We cycle, we do different things. You're in
Sure.
Vienna now.
Yes.
Compare the two places and why you are in Vienna. Is that a part of wherever you are moving in your in your
Oh boy.
career?
Well, they're very different. It's a wonderful. They're very they're complementary, I think. And New York has always been kind of like a base in many ways. There was a time that was London and New York. Um, Vienna is a very special place if you like what do we call classical music. Yeah, I mean, if we like traditional concert stage music. Vienna is it's paradise. And when I first came here and I realized that you could literally walk in the footsteps of all a lot of the masters, and visit places where they've lived, to really feel what is it that try to fantasize as what was it like for Mahler and Freud and Klimt, and Kafka to hang out in this coffee house here. And in fact, I did that. I mean, uh,
You had
I
to. It was
yeah,
mandatory and generic and genetic.
exactly. It was great. So, um, Vienna's a combination of different things. I mean, it was professional, and also. We have relatives here, trying to expose the family to different cultures and languages. So it worked really well because for a classical musician, it is a wonderful place to be. Um, as many other places are. So I gave up, honestly. I gave up trying to say I'm from here a long time ago because it got to a point that the musical life became so international that it just didn't matter anymore. And then once it gets to a point if I was in Brazil, for a lot of people, I was American. If I'm in America, then I'm Brazilian. If I'm if I'm here, and that actually reminds me of something that by chance, pianist Alfred Brendel said. I had the opportunity to meet him at his manager's house in New York years ago, and he actually said that. He said, again, it sounds corny, but he said, I'm a citizen of the planet. I'm not saying that about myself now. This is what he said. That you're home everywhere and you're home nowhere. I don't know if I quite agree with that verbatim with that statement, but but I find it very inspiring, and I am very grateful to be able to be working in different places so that I can experience these different things. And I think that all gets into the music.
Okay, let's do two tributes. One is to, and I do this more often than I ever dreamt in my entire lifetime I would be doing this, Gunther Schuller. The man
Yes.
was correct. I am encountering you, all of you. You're all becoming, I mean, and especially the younger ones, no offense. But the point is, there's a whole new culture in my so-called classical music profession. This culture of improvisation, this culture of mixing styles and genres.
Mhm.
Once upon a time, remember, people would kind of poo-poo that whole thing. It's absolutely
Oh,
incredible. And once again, just a little plug once more for you. By the way, our interview is going to go up. I'm going to, I hope in a couple of weeks, be able to get a review up for you
oh,
there as well. So we'll do 2 or 3 hits to my email list. Uh,
thank
but
you.
but all that's going to go up at performingartsreview.net, the interview. And videos, I think, as I recall, there are videos also of some of the movements and such. I can't remember from this.
From the album.
Yeah,
Yes, there is a
yeah,
video,
yeah.
right?
So,
Like where you can hear some of the music, but you can also hear myself and some of the
yeah,
musicians
I think
saying
I
a
have
few
most of that
of
up
the music.
already. Yeah. Let's see. What did I want? I'm kind of looking at the time. I don't want to go too far over here a
Sure.
little bit, but let's talk about. Let me see. Let me find the French horn player on this
Yes,
CD who also commissioned the Chamber Symphony. Correct?
correct.
Tell
Ger
me
Ger
about that one.
yes, Gergely, he conducts the Vienna Symphony Orchestra Chamber Orchestra, one of their official chamber ensembles. And a few years back, he and again, Orsi was playing the first violin as a guest for this performance. They did an all-American program, and it was Copeland, John Adams, and he asked me, John Adams will actually be in Vienna, and he might be at the performance. And would you write a chamber symphony for us?
You said no, no.
With
I'm far too busy.
with the exact same instrumentation as John Adams's chamber symphony. So the same exact instrumentation. And I said, why is that? Well, he said, well, to be honest, for logistical reasons. So we don't have to hire other musicians.
Yeah.
And I looked at, yeah, so I like Adams's work very much, and I looked at the instrumentation page and said, oh, that's a very cool combo actually. I like that instrumentation quite a lot. Why not? Of course, I made some modifications, especially to the percussion section and the
Yeah.
keyboard section.
You threw in a contrabassoon, I heard, right? Somehow.
Contrabassoon, I think I may have
That's a,
added that.
we're
I,
talking a tiny little riff. The guy gets $280 to play 4 notes. It's amazing.
oh, but it's so it's such a beautiful sound. I love that
Color,
instrument.
color, color.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
contrabassoon and the piccolo in opposite. So that's how it came about. So I wrote the piece and I called it New Yorker 50 Doors because he said, Miguel, can you please write something jazzy? And I said to him, if I tell you that I'm going to sit down to write something jazzy, then it's not going to work. I'm just gonna keep that in mind, and I'm gonna write something that it will probably be jazzy. And then for the main theme of the chamber symphony, and that's also in the liner notes. Again, I went back to a piece that I wrote in New York, just the main theme, just the main riff, which I wrote at the time when I lived at that time in New York City. When I was getting started, when I was still playing percussion in Central Park with a bunch of Brazilian guys, meeting people, getting $20, in cash tips, and and studying, and it's like and I repurposed that theme as the main as the link of the chamber symphony. The ba 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 da ba da ba dee 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 ba da ba da ba da ba da. Yeah, right. So and that's how it came about. So and then the Vienna Symphony Chamber Orchestra performed that in 2015. Gergely conducted it. Orsi played the first violin, and that's how it came about.
It's hard, isn't it? It's a
It's
pretty tough
difficult.
piece. It has some deep, dense, thick writing.
Yes, yeah, and everything is absolutely written out.
And let's
Uh,
see, I want to give credit to the man who wrote your program notes on liner notes on the CD. Brilliant, Frank K. DeVald or DeVald,
Default, yes.
who wrote the booklet notes and analysis. That's what we need. I am not supposed to talk about that stuff. It's too dull, frankly. But when you're reading it and the way he wrote and described these pieces, now
Yeah.
there are some, there's a musicologist really writing
Very
some
much
good
so.
notes. Yeah,
I was really grateful for his notes. I mean, really very,
fabulous.
very insightful, and it's not an easy task to convey. I mean, to listen to a new
Yeah.
piece of music and convey so much, especially when space is limited, and you have literally like a very short amount of lines that it can use.
And it very seldom occurs to me to credit the liner notes person, but these liner notes were very well written and fascinating to read as well. I think that's what I meant. I'm not a musicologist. I'm a conductor. I react to landscapes and seascapes and color and and
That's
rhythm.
fantastic. That's great. Well,
so,
thank you,
so
Dan. That's
let's see. What have we forgotten to cover? I'm at about 32 minutes, so I think we better wind it down.
sure.
Before I do kind of a summarization so that everybody can break their piggy banks and run out and write.
Should I very briefly talk about some of the recordings that very quickly preceded this one?
Sure, I'm listening.
So some of the recordings I'm very happy about personally is a record on Sony Classical of a song I wrote for singer Angelica Kirschlager and guitarist John Williams, which they recorded on her
Sounds
album When
fantastic.
Night Falls on Sony Classical. It's out. In fact,
All your music or what? Are
no,
you
no,
on the
it's
pro?
one. It was an album of lullabies, and
Beautiful.
this is one of them. Yeah, I'm very happy with that.
Maybe why don't you even send me if you do after we're done here,
Sure,
send me some links and I'll post all that stuff up so people can have a
of
look at these
course.
CDs as well.
Be
Anyway, go
happy.
ahead. Excuse me.
Yeah, no, no, not a problem. In fact, Angelica and I just rehearsed yesterday because we are going to play a very interesting gig. It's called Schubert Goes to Rio. So she's going to do a part playing a traditional lead, and then we're going to do some bossa novas together at a jazz club in Vienna. That it was a lot of fun, I have to
Wow.
say. It was
Yeah,
a
well,
lot of fun.
that's a curio. And also, I'm Schubert is, would he have gone? All right, anyway, excuse me.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So
And next.
that was, yeah. And another recording I'm quite fond of is called Amazonica, which was an ethnomusicological project that I did a few years back, also on Sony Classical. I wrote some music, inspired by the music of the time. It's essentially the birth of Brazil through music. So it's music from the Renaissance, Portugal and Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, with its influences from Middle Eastern music from the Middle Ages, the
So
minstrels
interesting.
music, merging with the indigenous musics of Brazil and the African music, which came later, and all melding together to create the musical identity of the
Yeah.
people. And funny enough, the shofar, or as it was called in that part of Brazil, the berrante, is used. The
Four
difference
centuries for the past 3 4 centuries. It's been
was,
there for.
was already used back then, which was in the 15, 1600s.
So an early migration of Jews from Europe, presumably, to
That had
Brazil,
nothing.
maybe.
There was an early migration, but that wasn't. But in fact, the Behant is not at all connected to Judaism. That is just the instrument that the cattle rangers would use to tame the cattle. And the call of the cattle ranger is very, it's usually the Behati is like the shofar, but it's larger, so it's pitched lower. And that's when I realized this instrument is so transcendent. It just kind of like it really connects, in my opinion, the earthly with the otherworldly, and that's what I
Very
tried.
mysterious.
Going back
Co-
to the concerto, that's what I wanted to achieve there. And obviously, the funny thing too in Amazonica is that you do hear the singing of the cattle rangers
I'd have
when
to
they
re-listen.
when they sing
What do
to
you mean?
the cattle. They are singing very much. It could almost be out of a temple or in the Middle East. I mean, it could really it's incredible similarities, and it got frozen in that part of Brazil. It just got
Right.
frozen there. Like the Portuguese is archaic, so there are words that are not used because it's closer
It
to the
stopped.
original Portuñol, which was the original before there was Portuguese and Spanish. The Portuñol, yeah.
Uh-huh. I see. I see. Somewhat. I love By the way, I just love the
Because
Portuguese.
we go to
Period.
Portugal
Their,
quite a lot, so
their
yeah.
their history, their language, all of it. They're
Oh,
such an amazing people are the Portuguese, and by extension, if you will, by world
of course.
exploration, Brazilians. So, yeah. So where were we? Are we about
Yeah,
done?
so 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 that's another record I'm very fond of. And the record, the symphonic album I did before the current one, was also with Dennis Russell Davis conducting the Bruckner Orchestra Linz.
Yeah.
And that we did the Sinfonia for Flute and Orchestra I mentioned before with Wolfgang Schultz doing the principal flute, the solo. And also a piece I'm very fond of, which is called Amazonia Symphonic Poem.
Oh,
And
sounds
that
great.
one, that one's for big, large, very large orchestra, winds in three, massive, also with a pipe organ and six percussionists. And
That's
that one I wrote quite a while back. I was 21, and it was really an ecological call, saying, look, let's take care of this. It's possible to use it and to ensure progress, but it's got to be done in a sustainable way. And it's really amazing that it's the theme becomes ever more important, about our environment
yes.
and how and the magic formula of
By the
course
way,
we need progress, we need development, we need industry, we need agriculture, we need everything. I mean, people need that, people need work, but on the other hand, we also need a planet to live on.
and what
So
you
so
just
so
described, excuse me for interrupting for a second,
sure.
but what you just described with that symphony, large orchestral work, takes me back to when I conducted American Collegiate Symphony, and I was looking for that kind of large work because these were, college kids from all over the country, a big, big orchestra, and so I wish I had no. Maybe you were still an infant or something back when I was conducting
Come on.
the American Collegiate Symphony. But what a perfect messaging piece for a collegiate, something for a big orchestra to tour with of young people. That's all. That was the fantasy that I conjured while you were describing it. We're going to have to wind it down,
Okay, Dan, that's
or we're
fine. It's
done.
been a
Let me
pleasure.
just run through this once
Sure.
more. I've been speaking with Brazilian American composer Miguel Kertsman. We're talking about his Naxos release 2018. Three Concertos CD, beautiful cover, by the way, wonderful design, very dynamic.
Yeah,
Um,
Naxos did a great
yeah,
job. I'm really, really happy. Great
uh,
label.
and this has three of Kurtzman's concerti: the Concerto Brasileiro for flute, strings, and percussion, Concerto for violin, horn, shofar, and orchestra, and his Journey from the Bassoon and Orchestra, and then the Chamber Symphony Number 2 as well. New York of 50 Doors, London Philharmonic Orchestra conducted by Dennis Russell Davies. My jaw dropped when I saw that, which means listeners are going to hear your pieces performed to perfection. Really, I mean that's what I
Um,
heard. And interpreted to perfection. I think you and I can agree with Dennis Russell
Absolutely.
Davies in charge. That's it. So everybody, this is all going to go up on performingartsreview.net. I hope those of you that are conductors and programmers will really give a listen to some of these excerpts and see. I especially love the flute concerto. I think it's fabulous.
Thank you.
Miguel, it's probably after 10 or something by now in Vienna.
Yes, it is just about, yeah.
So, and we had great reception. How lucky
Yes,
can
yeah.
we get?
I
Okay,
know.
thanks.
Take two is often very good.
Yeah, so we perhaps we'll talk again. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Dan. All the best. It's been a
Right,
pleasure.
bye-bye.
Appreciate it.